Hello, Chapter 9, Requirements Engineering. So in this chapter, we are going to look at management's role during the requirements engineering phase. This is probably the most important phase for managers. If they can control the level of requirements, don't put so much into the requirements or prioritize things, they'll be very successful. If I tell you the difference between a successful manager and not so successful is there is their sort of involvement at this stage. There are some managers who put so much in the requirements at the earliest stage, overpromise to the customer and the or the client, and the client expects so much, and at the end they cannot deliver, or they tell things in different priorities. A good manager gets involved in the requirements engineering early, make sure if they can deliver so much, promises half as much, because what if something goes wrong? So in this stage, we are going to do what do we want to build and how do we write it down. So this is the process of this. And of course, the manager has to supervise this, make sure everything is in order. So this is probably a large chapter, so but most likely I'll handle this one in two separate videos just to make sure it's not overloaded as far as loading goes. This is the first half. So first of all, requirement engineering is the first step in finding a solution for some data processing issue or a problem. So the result of this becomes what's called a specification. In companies, they call it a spec. So a spec is really the short terms company use to basically tell you that what needs to be done for a specification. So this is something we need to keep in mind. Requirement specification is typically a contract for the customer and a starting point for design, right? Customer beyond this has no view in saying anything. They just look at this spec and say, okay, I'm good with this. Let's build this one. And for your own internal, for your own employees, this is the starting point for the design. This is where they're gonna look at the specification and they start going through the design first. So how do we write this thing down? Is this written in natural languages? Okay, because natural languages are extremely dangerous when it comes to writing requirements. Natural languages are very vague in essence because you could amalgamate things, you could make things different. For example, in a requirement, you could say, let's design an application that helps students register for a course. Okay, so you just amalgamated so many different things because student validation is involved, semester information is involved, course offering is involved, prerequisites is involved. So instead of separating it down by natural language, so that's not typically the best way to do. So for example, all users have the same control field if there is a statement like that. So the same value in the control field, the same format for the control field. There is one control field for all users. It's just this. Let me give you sort of a funny but relevant example. This happens to all managers when they are hiring people. You look at somebody's resume and they say, "Oh, I'm very good at Windows," and then you hire that person, and then later on when they try to write APIs or software, they know nothing. So when you tell them, but you told me in the interview, you're really good, you have experience. He says, no, 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 no. I didn't say I'm very good in developing software. I said I'm really good in Windows. Well, so is my grandma. I mean, just knowing Windows, that's not good enough. You need to actually be able to function or write code. See, this is lost in interpretation. If the manager had a way to test this customer or this employee while he was interviewing him, that was a different story. So this is the way it is. Or another example, and this actually happened to us. I have a friend of mine, his son, kind of, not very active, and we decided to make him a little bit active. So we suited up and we said, hey, Arash, do you like to play basketball? And do you like basketball? The question was, do you like? And he says, yeah, I like basketball. So we went there to start throwing the ball, and he says, oh, no, 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 I like to watch basketball. I don't like to play basketball. See, this is the way. So if you look at all these statements, all users have the same control field. But what are we talking about? Is the same value in the control field, the same format of the control field? Uh, so this is, as you can see, the complication. So requirement engineering, first important slide in this chapter, asterisks. There are 4 steps. One is understanding the problem. We call it elicitation. To elicit means to go find it. So why do we call it elicitation? Because requirements, some things you do know already, right? You know the requirements, but there are things you don't know. Okay, for example, when you try to design MyMath for the system, people knew about the courses, classes, payments, admissions, graduations, but they didn't know much about the visas, J visa versus L visa versus F1 versus F2 visas. So you could write the stuff you know, but go elicit the rest of it. Bring a lawyer or somebody specialist from international office who knows these things. So generally we call it elicitation. Either you know it, or if you don't know it, go find it. After that one, we need to describe the problem, right? So you gather everything. Oh, we need to have a system that helps a student register, admit, all of that. Then we have to describe the problem. So it's called a specification. This is where we actually need to write it down in a nice way. And then agreeing upon the nature of the problem. Okay, this is agreeing between who? Agreement typically means 2 sides to it. One is your development shop and one is your client. So this is called validation. So, oh, client, is this what you want? This is what we're planning to interpret. This is what we are planning to design. So we validated and finally agreeing upon the boundaries of the problem. It's called negotiation, right? This is when the customer says, well, no, but I don't want that one. Oh, but I want this one early. Oh, but with login, I want you to force the password to be expired 30 days. You just sort of just negotiate the boundaries. We call it the boundaries because generally you agree on that one. The system needs a login, but the boundaries are important. What is the format of the ID? Should you provide forgot password feature? Should you provide password expiration? That's going to take a long time. If you don't want to recover forgotten password or force them expire every 30 days, you could do this one substantially faster than adding those features. So that's what we're going to do this one. And this is really an iterative process. You got to do this for this over and over until everybody's happy. Okay. And it is better because if you do it at this stage, basically what it means, you exactly know what to do, as opposed to go and don't negotiate this and go develop it, give it to the customer, and the customer says, oh, I don't like that. What's going to happen? You have to have written the code, you've compiled, you've tested it, you have to go back to the drawing board. Okay, this is something that it is something really hard. Let me give you a quick example. A few years ago, I had a guest speaker that was helping with Winter Olympics. He was one of the designers for the Winter Olympics in the U.S. in Salt Lake City many years ago, and they were discussing fiber optics, and they did not negotiate the boundaries. They did not discuss the how the fiber optics works. They just came up, the telecasting the games, which is downhill skiing, and they scorekeeping, reporting to the news, and all of that. But one little thing they forgot to consider: how fiber optics operates in the very cold weather. And this is Winter Olympics in the mountains, so the temperature could get really, really cold. They just said, fiber optics, it works fine. After they put it to use, they were trying to, videotape some items, and they could not get the proper data. Things were blurry, and they found out about fiber optics when it gets really cold, it misbehaves. Oh my God, that was so late. He said it put them back by 6 months because they had to dig out all the cable and, the fiber optics, put insulation around it and put it back. That costed them millions of dollars plus 6 months. The dollar wasn't that much, the months, because Winter Olympics was approaching and they weren't ready. So had they talked to a physicist and they paid him $200, maybe not even money, had they sort of negotiated these or validated this, they would have known that fiber optics, you have to, if it gets really cold, you have to worry about the insulation, right? So this is typically the way we do. So as I said, this is the graphical view of the last slide. So please remember these 4 steps. These are called RE for requirements engineering. Elicitation, go get the requirements. Specification, write it down. Validate, make sure customer is happy with this one. And negotiation, if you need to adjust it, and so forth. I mean, this is iterative. You do this until you're happy, and you document it here, right? You just all this stuff you just document, and eventually these things become your document. Remember, you sometimes you submit a project management or writing requirements down. This is where it is kept. Okay, so conceptual modeling. One thing I want to talk about is conceptual as opposed to practical. Remember, conceptual is when you start thinking about things as opposed to make it to actually a practical matter, something that's really there, right? For example, conceptually, you're thinking of a car that goes this speed, looks that way, but in practice, you may come up with something else. Or like, look at your plans. Your concept is, oh, I'm going to go ahead, get a degree in computer science and a master's, then I'm going to go work for Facebook, etc. But in reality, you might do something else. You might finish your master's, go to PhD, become a professor. So conceptual modeling, you model part of a reality, basically. This is called, I want you to get used to this. This is a very important slide, by the way, a couple of asterisks. We call it the universe of discourse, or UOD, okay? Universe of discourse. This, I'll talk about it. This model is an explicit conceptual model. That means put all the details in, not just a theory, not just I'm going to do this exactly. For example, when you think of getting your master's, say, okay, I need to get GRE scores. I need to get GPA this way. I need to apply for these universities. So first, it was just a conceptual model, which was just, I want to go get my master's, then go to corporate. The next one, I'm going to say, I'm going to go, this is getting explicit. I want to get a GRE. I need this score. I'm applying for university A, B, C, D, E, F. And after that, when I'm applying for these companies, I'm going to go to the West Coast as opposed to East Coast. So you get very, very specific. So people in the UOD have an implicit conceptual model of the things. Typically, what you want is explicit. But most of us at the beginning, it's implicit. This is called the universe of discourse, which I'm going to sort of open up for you a little bit. It's okay. It's kind of like you tell your friends, let's have dinner tomorrow night. That's very implicit, right? And it's a conceptual model because you haven't had it yet. You're thinking of getting together, have a dinner with some friend. But then to get explicit, you have to pick exact time, who's joining that dinner, are you driving there? Are you walking there? Who's paying? That becomes explicit. So this is getting from a conceptual to a practical one to actually make the dinner happen. It's kind of like I'm going to have a party in my home. That's very easy to say, okay? But it involves a lot of things. So making this implicit model explicit poses a lot of problem. One is analysis problem, negotiation problems, right? For example, you want to have a party at your home, that's very easily said implicitly. Explicitly, well, do I have enough room for all these people? Do I have enough money to buy all these items? Do I even feel like doing this right now? Who's coming? Who's going? What happens at midnight when the party is over? Are they staying at my house? Some of them are from out of town. Are they driving back? Are they going to the hotel? So it actually makes it a universe. It's not just one thing. It's a number of items that surrounds that. The item is a 2-hour party you're going to have at your home, but ultimately you have to worry about sending invitation, asking people, worry about where they stay at the end, who's delivering the food, are you cooking the food? So as you can say, the core is that, oh, the little thing in the middle, but then you have to deal with all the other thing that goes with that. And of course, in requirements engineering, it's difficult because success really depends on the degree with which we manage to properly describe the system. So if we don't write this thing down, remember we are in the writing stage of it, properly putting it together. Software is not continuous. Okay, so for example, let's just use something here. Um, Most of you know Chekhov, right? But it really depends which one are we talking about? Chekhov, 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 or whatever they actually said it in the original language. They're all the same thing. But the way we expected it, the way we write it, it is all different. We all have different view of what is success is, what is completion is. To you, completion means having a beautiful product. To your client, maybe having it fast. So this is something we have to negotiate, make sure everything is set. So we have to be also, aware of subtle mismatches. For example, there are a lot of little things that you don't worry. For example, a library employee may also be a client. Okay, think of you go borrow a book from a library. It's obvious you are the person who's borrowing. The library employee is the one who's giving you the book. But what if the librarian wants to borrow a book? That's a subtle thing, right? Do they need to go through the same process? Of of course you say they need to, but this is subtle. What if a librarian has a book and wants to borrow it, and it's a rare book, and there's four other people before that person? Could there be favoritism here? Could that person just give that book to someone he likes, or themselves? So there's a difference between a book and a copy of a book also, right? So sometimes we have to be very distinct about some of the things we do or write the way we write it. As I said, remember the example that I gave you with the playing basketball. So I like basketball. Does that mean you like to play basketball, or do you like to watch basketball? Right? So instead, we have to be, this is a subtle thing. So you shouldn't say liking. You could say, I like to play basketball. I like to watch basketball. So a status info, present versus not present, is not just sufficient, or a copy of a book may be lost, stolen, or in repair, right? So these are some of the things that we do. For example, you go borrow a book from a library, okay? So you could say, well, obviously you have 2 weeks. When you come back every day, you pay penalty, obviously. But what if you bring, so far is good, right? Cut and dry, book returning. But what if you return the book and it's damaged? Some pages somebody has written stuff on it, or some pages. What do you do there? What's the protocol? Because that person actually brought the book back. You don't have a contract that says, please, every page of this book, because you don't check every page of this book when you give it to them, so you cannot check it back. So now you get to the subtleties here. Okay, what if the person loses the book? Okay, are they supposed to give you that exact book, or is there a price for the book? What is this? Is a rare book that you borrowed, and it's rare, so by definition, we cannot find it anymore. Is there a price over that book? Did you give this to the person who borrowed it? He says, well, I'm sorry, this book was the book by Nostradamus, and this was the only copy we had, and it's $5,000. Those some book copies are very, very expensive. So these are the subtle things that I talk about. So humans as information sources, okay, that is actually by definition is a false statement, because we have different backgrounds. We have short-term versus long-term memory. We have prejudices. You might be prejudiced about something, or you might be heavily tied to something, okay? And we have limited capacity for rational thinking sometimes. Okay, so for example, you've seen these superstitious stuff. People don't like, in part of the word number 13 is a number people avoid. In part of the word number 14 is. Okay, so it's like, what is this thing? Or there are places that are afraid of black cat, and there is no rational things behind these things. Versus the places that they worship the same cat, right? So what we have to do is, you cannot rely on these things. I'll give you a funny example here. There was a famous tennis player in the US. I can't remember his name. It doesn't come to my mind right now. He's a top 10 best player in the US. But he wasn't the number one or two. This is during the time Pete Sampras and Andre Agassi and so forth, sort of late 1990s and early 2000, before this next genre of Roger Federer and those came. And this player, um, I can't remember his name. He's one of the famous ones, but I'll tell you when I remember. One day he's actually from New York area. He was driving to play tennis. This is U.S. Open tennis, one of the four famous sort of tennis arrangings. And his car gets to a flat. So while he goes there, he gets there, and the person who's changing the tire tells him, might as well change all your tires. They're getting old. And he changes all the tires. Then he goes and plays the tennis, and he wins that game. Then on every match he plays, from then till the rest of his life, he goes and changes the four wheels of his tires every time. Because it is something. This is sort of irrational thinking. Is this wrong? No. Does it show this person is not smart? Actually, he's a very intelligent guy. One of the Ivy League schools he went to. So it has nothing to do with this. As I said, we have certain prejudices, certain backgrounds, certain cultures, depending where we are. Unfortunately, all of us are in the same thing, and we are supposed to write requirements. We are supposed to come up with an agreement, and that makes things a little bit harder. So this is called negotiation problem. So there is a thing called existing methods, or what we call a Taylorian. Taylorian basically means we look at all issues from a scientific way. So forget about all these, religious, all these superstitious, all these cultural things that, for example, Persians versus Brazilians versus Indian versus American. Let's put it aside. Let's just look at it from a very mathematic, scientific way. Okay, that is currently the existing methods are very much like this. But the problem with this, they will lose a lot of the oomph that your product will have. Some products, some websites, some apps, if you don't have some of those items in it, the product becomes very cut and dry. The beauty of the science is always accurate, but the accurateness of the science is very predictable, right? I mean, we can predict everything. 2 plus 2 is always 4. So what is the fun in that? Okay. So that is why we need to do maybe a little bit better. So they may work in technical environment, but in many UODs contains people's, their models may be irrational, incomplete, inconsistent, or even contradictory. So in these cases, we cannot even put it in a Taylorian way. It's just because the way people expect it, it is different than, it won't fit the scientific model. It won't fit the way everybody can, agree upon. So as an analyst, you cannot neglect these aspects. You participate in shaping these UODs, basically, in this universe of discourse. Okay. So let me just go back here. I want to talk a little bit about UOD. UOD is basically means I have something. Remember, you had the party, and then you have to deal with everything else. So let me give you another example here. Let's say you want to buy a car. Okay. I want you to understand the universe of discourse, and then we're going to apply it to our projects. Okay, so when you want to go buy a car, so you go to a dealership. It's obvious. Let's say you want to buy a new car. So what is the O here? What is the thing you're trying to get? You want to get a car. But then you go to the dealership, and the dealership says, okay, this car is $25,000. Then you say, oops, I don't have that much money. Okay, now the dealership says, okay, I will finance this for you. Okay. Oh, that's great. So I can only give $1,000 down, and the rest you're gonna help me. Yeah, PP finances because you have a good job. Great. See, now the issue was buying a car. Now we became a banker, right? We're dealing with banking issues. Imagine you're writing the software for this or application for this car dealership, right? So you're in charge of this one. So at first, when they came to you, you just thought of, oh, I'm going to have pictures of the cars, beautiful spots. Now you have to worry about the banking and payments and everything. And then the customer says, oh, by the way, I have a used car. And the dealer says, oh, we buy that used car. So now you have to worry about buying. Wait a second, but I thought dealership was in charge of selling cars. Now they're buying your car. We call it trade-ins. Now you have a third division. So we started with selling cars, new cars. Now we're doing financing, and we also buy an old one. But then later on, the client comes and says, well, this car is broken or the brakes don't work. Oh, bring it to us. We repair it. Oh, no, you're into service. Okay. Oh, later on they come and says, hey, I really need to order some cool, seats or some cool stuff. Oh, now you have a parts department. See what happened? Then the customer comes and says, I want a service, but how can should I wait for it here? It's gonna take 6 hours. Oh, no, no, no. We're gonna arrange for you to go home with a taxi or Uber or we drive you there. Now you're into the sort of delivery type of a business. So see how the universe formed. The core was your party in the middle, purchasing a car, but now you're doing payments, you're doing financing, you're doing dealership, you're doing. So that is how it happens. When you do a project, when you're doing requirements or when you're doing negotiations, you cannot really go Taylorian here because Taylorian would say, well, customer wants to buy a car. Here's the car, here's the price, done. But now what do you deal with all of these things? So now, of course, this is good for you, it's good for the dealership because when they bring the car back for service, there's going to be more financial benefits for you as well. But so you can see we start with one little problem, but it grows. They ask us for my math to create for students, but now we have to deal with visas. Okay, now students, now we have to deal with the housing. So I have the website or pages for their housing and so forth. So remember, typically you have a very implicit requirement like students getting an MS degree, but then you become a University of Discourse. You have a University of Discourse, a ton of other issues around that. Okay. So one thing to ponder upon is how do you handle conflicts during requirements engineering? Conflicts is typically, remember, is between you and your client, right? So how do you handle those? How we study the world around us, okay? So here's people have a set of assumptions about a topic, okay? They study, we call this the paradigm, right? It's just you think this, like if you think of I want to do an MS degree, this is your paradigm. You think, oh, I gotta get the GRE, I gotta go to have a good GPA, I have to get the applications, I have to go to that university, pay payments, get a degree. That is this. So this set of assumption concerns how knowledge is typically gathered and how is it organized. And this in turn results in two dimensions. Stuff that are subjective or objective, right? This is, remember, subjective means subject to interpretation. It's loosey-goosey. Objective means very precise. For example, subjective says, let's get together for dinner tomorrow. Objective says, let's get together at 7 p.m. at P.F. Chang's with John, Peter, and Joe for dinner. That's objective. And we also have conflict and order. If you try to organize an event with your friends, you know what I mean. Sometimes you have an order that everybody says, oh, yeah, great. That's 7 p.m. P.F. Chang's, fantastic idea. Conflict, no, no, I don't. I hate Chinese food. I can't get together at 7. Why don't we do it at 8 instead? Why don't we have a steak instead? So this is the order. So if you notice, then I have two dimensions here. One is issues subjective or objective, but I also have things that are what I call it conflicts and orders, a lot of those, which results in four, so we call it archetypical approaches, because if you look at subjective, objective, conflict, and order, that creates four different types of events. So these four approaches, we have names for it. Actually, the field has names, and please remember these four. The best word is objective and order. So in other words, you exactly know what you want to do tomorrow dinner 7 p.m. with Tom, Jack, and Joe, and everybody agrees. This is objective and order. Because this we call it functional. Functional means perfection. We exactly know what we want and everybody agrees on it. You exactly know what you want your app to have. You and your client agree. So this is called perfection as well as objective, subjective, and order. So the analyst is the expert who empirically seeks the truth. In other words, if you're, and remember, analyst is the person who plays the middleman between your client and your office. So you just hang around, make sure everything is in order. Let's look at the bottom one, the worst case. Okay, we call it new humanism. This is where nothing is subjective. In other words, we don't even know what you want. Nothing is decided, and we have a ton of conflict. Okay, we have conflict over everything. This is called new humanism. So, what is the role of the analyst? Is to be more of a social therapist and bring people together. So analyst's job is, okay, you remember how you want to buy something and get to an argument with your friend. So you're supposed to say, okay, client, why don't we just do this? Okay, let's meet halfway. Instead of having all these features, why don't we give them all, but let's give them in two phases to you. And sort of we try to resolve that order. So this is the worst case, but you don't have any, everything is subjective. In other words, nothing is precise, and we have a lot of conflict. And of course, we have two other ones in the middle. One we call it social relativism, and one we call it radical structuralism. These are the terms you use, so I want you to learn these. Social relativism means things are subjective, but we have order. In other words, we haven't defined the details. It's not objective, but we have order. Everybody agrees that we should. Okay, everybody agrees we should have dinner tomorrow night. So it's the order is there. The details are not yet there. Where to go eat yet, etc. But everybody agrees we should do something. So the job of analyst is really change agent. So requirement engineering is really a learning process guiding by the analyst. So here I just try to convert subjective to objective and become more functional. This is a little bit of a harder one. This is when things are objective. We precisely know what we want, but we have a lot of conflicts. You, two of you want to really go to this restaurant or see this movie, but two of you don't. So that is called radical structuralism. So here is like your client and you agree on some things. Everything's precisely written. You exactly know what you want, but there's conflict. Your client wants, for example, these four things first, these other ones last, and you want it in the other order because of certain reasons, right? So there is a struggle between classes. So the analyst chooses for either party. So unfortunately here, the analyst has to sort of take side because there's a conflict, right? If the four of you have decided that no, I definitely don't want to have Chinese food, two of you and one of you want to say I want to have steak, you have to take side. I mean, you cannot just say because it is just the way things are. So these are the four things. Just remember, on one side we have subjective, objective. On the order we have order. Conflict creates four different situations. The best way is functional. The worst is neo-humanism, and then two in the middle. So please remember, if I ask you what is, if situation is called objective and we have conflict, it's called radical structuralism. This is actually words we use in sociology and psychology today. So you need to kind of be aware of that. Okay, another point. This example I didn't cover, but this was actually part of our book. How does the London ambulance system example from chapter 1 relates to different possible approaches to requirements? London ambulance, if you ever lived in London, London is a crazy city. Everything is one way, tons of bridges, and sometimes you go one way and then you cannot come back the same way, or bridges are backed up because of this. So there was a lot of scenarios written of how do you handle sort of an ambulance system that wants to, if bridges are backed up and so forth. But this is not that big of a deal, so just go ahead and ignore it since I did not use that case study in this class. Okay, so let's talk about elicitation techniques a little bit. Okay, so elicitation, um, basically, let's see, where did I go here? Okay, elicitation means how do you go elicit information, right? Remember there was four stages. Elicitation, some stuff you know, some stuff you know you need to go get. So to get, there's a lot of different ways. One is interviews. I mean, if you, for example, remember the Winter Olympics example I used, if the person had just had interviewed the physicist, they would have known this. Okay. There's another one called the Delphi technique. Okay, Delphi technique is really more on focusing on consensus. Okay, so this is actually, if you ever take agile class, we call it sort of poker planning. It's you try to come up with a consensus. For example, if you think there's six of us and you think something's going to take 4 days to do, another takes 3 days to do, and one say 14 days to do, we try to justify why. And somebody who says, well, it's going to take 42 days to do this, ask them to explain why. And somebody who says 3 days, ask them to do why. And then we keep doing this until we get these numbers close. And if we don't, we average things out. This is called Delphi. Another one's called brainstorming. We just sit in a room and start throwing ideas. Remember, we're trying to find everything and agree upon things. We do a lot of task analysis and scenario analysis. We also talk about ethnography, which ethnography is when you look at the social aspects of your problem. For example, your client, let's say, is a grocery store. It says, okay, create this website and app for our grocery store that is, people can, either, purchase order online, or, and also store managers can use this website to organize things. But then you could say, well, how can we prevent different branches to allow overtime to the employees? That's a social aspect. So what we could do, we could say everybody has to log in and log out after 8 hours. And if they're not logged out, you log them out. This is sort of the ethnography deals with social issues, which is really not allowing people to work overtime. Okay, so this is another technique. And another one is called basically form analysis. So you come up with a bunch of templates and forms that everybody writes their opinions, and we try to come up with a form that actually captures everything. The analysis of natural language description. This is something that maybe come up with a better way of writing your requirements instead of just natural languages. So if somebody doesn't say, I like basketball versus I like to play basketball, so probably a little bit better formatting, because a lot of these things is in writing your requirements. And the other one, synthesis for existing systems. So basically see what is the really core thing you're expecting in your system. Okay, is this really taking classes is the core, or is it improving the graduation rate is the core? So find out what is the most important. Sometimes more visibility is the issue. Sometimes more quality is the issue. Sometimes more quantity is the issue. Let's agree which one it is more important for us. The other one is domain analysis. Okay, understanding the domain always helps. For example, if you try to write software for a grocery store, you better know how the grocery stores work. Okay. Also, we call it BPR, business process redesign. So this is basically another way for process redesign, which I'll talk later on. Of course, prototyping. These are different elicitation techniques that we usually use for finding this. So I think this is getting a little long, so I'm gonna probably, let's see here, stop right about here, and I will continue the rest of this in the next video for you. Right? So task analysis.